Hello, everybody. It's May 15th, and we're thrilled to have Sandy and team with us today. Sandy was involved in the development of the most recent report from the National Academy on the future of youth development, building systems and strengthening programs, focusing on out of school time. And so Sandy's here today to help give us an overview and also just be able to facilitate a conversation about how we use this report going forward. So thank you, Sandy.
Thanks, Mar. So I'm just going to start and give an overview. Please ask any questions you have, interrupt me, and we can, talk about various topics. This report was funded by the Wallace Foundation. It was written by an amazing group of scholars. I was lucky to be part of the group, and also an amazing set of staff over at the National Academies. And next week, just to highlight it, Jen Reinhardt's going to be at the UC Links office hours. She's from the After School Alliance, and so she knows a lot about funding workforce and all intermediaries and all those kinds of things. Um, so to start real quick, I'm not going to read through this whole thing, but we were given a task of work, statement of task, and it was to focus on out of school activities and development for low income and marginalized youth K to 12. And so you can see we're supposed to focus on what do programs look like what's out there for youth, what's the evidence on effectiveness and the outcomes for kids. What is it about activities or the various approaches that create these positive effects for youth? And for whom. So like understanding how does intersectionality play into this, looking at existing policies, regulations, also funding for out of school programs, what's the current state, how can it be improved, and then what are the gaps that need to be addressed moving forward. So that was our scope generally. Um, there's a lot of information in the report. So there's 9 chapters. I listed the title of each chapter here. So intro, theories, systems, participation, workforce, implementation, looking at experiences, quality, effectiveness, funding and policies, and then sort of a conclusion, like how do we move forward ensuring high quality programs for all youth. So I'm going to talk real quick just to give you a little flavor or taste of like the first 6 chapters and spend a little bit more on the effectiveness or the outcomes. Um, so the theories chapter, we really tried, I just put pictures of 3 of the theories we put on here, like here's thriving, here's a model used by Durlach and colleagues. Down here is one of the ones I use a lot. It has the park model. By Hirsch and colleagues, and then Williams and Deutsch added, how do you think about race, ethnicity? How does that influence what happens in the programs, what kids are bringing to the programs and the outcomes they pull from them? What we tried to do in the theories chapter was like pull all these different theories that people have used to see, how do people think about after school? And they think about it in a variety of different ways. Chapter 3 thinks about out of school activities that are serving youth and families, how they are embedded within a range of other systems. So, how after school activities are embedded within out of school systems, like the intermediaries we talked about, school systems, park and rec systems, child welfare, physical health, and mental health systems. And that all of these various systems are influencing youth and also what's provided in the out of school hours. So, a lot of times, myself included, I focus on after school and the activity and how that activity, what's going on there and how that influences youth. You need to remember that that's what's happening in there is being influenced by all these other systems. So when you think of the out of school workforce, that's another thing that's really impinging on or influencing what's going on within activities. So this chapter is really great if you want to think about activities within the broader systems. And Mike, you and I have talked before about this, but like universities are part of this in thinking about systems that are impacting out of school. So that's one way university community collaborations are coming into this. Chapter 4, we move on to participation and the types of programs. And so a lot of the data is coming from After School Alliance. They have an After America After Three survey that this data is coming from. And you can see these are the number of youth participants in after school programs at various years. You can see it's sort of in the millions. Peaked in 2014, went down a bit in 2020, and in 2022, the bar is light blue because that's during COVID. So I think we need more data to see if after school activities have recovered yet in terms of their participation rate, because I know it's kind of been slow. Now, even though after school activity or programs are serving a lot of youth, there's still many youth who would participate in a program if they had one available. And so in 2020, they estimated about 24.6 million youth would participate in a program if they had one available. And of that, about 11 million are from low-income families. And as we all know, there's certain groups that have more limited access, including Black, Hispanic youth, youth in rural areas. And I think there's the highest demand for the younger grades, the elementary school kids, K-5 versus middle school and then high school. So we have made progress, but there's still a lot of the same persistent gaps, I think, in terms of participation. And then when you look at what are the barriers, it's a lot of the ones that we've probably all run into with our own programs, availability, location, transportation, the cost, awareness about the program, family involvement, families' perceptions about the programs, participant interest, and the timing and competing activities. And then in the green over here, this is more data from the After School Alliance. They were looking at rural families and looking at the changes and why some youth or families and youth weren't going to programs. And they looked at the difference between 2014 and 2020. And you can see that more families over time thought it was more expensive. So they couldn't go. They were concerned about safety, getting to and from the program, inconvenient location. Let me see if I can pull up the chat here. And the hours and that programs weren't available. So that's sort of chapter 4. I know I'm going real fast.
Can I say one thing there?
Yeah,
I was just noting in the chat that it seemed for UC Links programs, it's almost double the barriers,
yeah,
right? Because you have all of those barriers affecting, whether or not kids are attending. And I know across UC Links programs in California, at least, a lot of programs are now experiencing challenges with enrollment and
yep,
similarly with undergraduates as well, right? Because
yep. Yeah, like our undergrads often at UCI are two, the main barriers, some of them are location and transportation and how close is it to the university. And then I know sometimes Lupe's looked up like a Boys and Girls Club. It's like as a bird would fly, it's close, but it would take like an hour and a half or 2 hours to get there on the buses. And so transportation is another issue. And yeah, I do think I'm going to go back a slide here if I can. That I, you know, participation went down during COVID. I don't know how long it's going to take for it to rebound for programs because I think families are still, and particularly certain sections of the population, they're still struggling and they're still recovering from it. Okay, so then when you go to chapter 5, chapter 5 focuses on the out of school workforce and describing who they are, who is it that's typically working in these activities, and talking about their training or lack thereof, and also some of the concerns or barriers that they have faced. So they talk about how a lot of them feel a strong sense of commitment. They're doing this work because they know it's important. They want to make a difference. But many of them feel burnout. They're not compensated well. I know health benefits are an issue, full-time work, all these sorts of things have come up. And just as another sort of highlight, this is another chapter where we also talk about university collaborations and the role that universities could play in when you think about undergraduate and graduate education, but also extended education. So education just to the general public, not for an undergraduate enrolled in the university, on helping train and get this workforce ready. Um, Chapter 6 then talks about positive features of after school activities, experiences there. And so one thing you'll notice, so one of the other main National Academy reports on after school was published in 2002, the Blue Book that a lot of people called it on community programs. One of the things that was taken from that, or the main takeaways from that book, was the 8 indicators of program quality. And one of the differences with this report, partly because of our charge on low income and marginalized youth, but I also think a change in the field was looking at culturally sustaining, culturally responsive practices. So you'll see this theme throughout, and youth voice throughout the chapters. And then we talk about another key feature, which it's always been this way, is supportive relationships among peers and among staff. And we know that from UC Links, how important for us, like those undergraduates are for the kids. Honoring youth adult partnerships. Again, this is something else that I think has been key to UC Links from the beginning. And then intentionally cultivating a positive program climate. And so also in chapter 6, this is in table 6.2, we elaborated on those 8 indicators that were in that 2002 report. And so some of them are the same indicators, mattered then, they mattered now. Physical, psychological safety, appropriate structure, supportive relationships, opportunities to belong, efficacy, mattering, skill building. Those, you'll still see the same 8 here because again, they mattered in 2002. Matter now. We elaborated on them more to talk about honoring youth voice and choice, talking about culturally sustaining, responsive. You'll see this responsive and inclusive that we think to move forward, that now we have research showing that all these things matter and that it'll be really key moving forward. And again, particularly given our charge on the low income and marginalized. Okay. So then chapter 7 was on effectiveness and outcomes. And so this is one of the longer chapters. I was one of the chairs of this chapter. And they had a few groups do literature review searches for us. We also added literature we knew of. We read collectively hundreds of studies to put in here. It's not exhaustive, but we tried to make it comprehensive of generally what's known. And we looked at a range of outcomes. So we did look at academic outcomes, which a lot of the funders and everybody's interested in. But we also looked at a range of social outcomes. I'll show you more specific ones in a few minutes. But we looked at youth identity, culture, civic engagement, physical, mental health, peer, family relationships, also the reductions of violence, risk behavior, substance use. And there are a few studies looking at how activities are related with outcomes into adulthood. So there's a section on that, which I think is key. So one of the conclusions for this chapter was that we do think activities hold promise for youth development. This is not surprising to people who are here at this meeting. For a lot of the social outcomes that, we found it related to a stronger sense of responsibility, more positive work ethic, social skills, civic activities. And these links were more likely to emerge when the activity was high quality and or they were designed or had the goal of that changing that outcome. So for example, if you take civic activities, participation in activity was more likely to be related to later civic engagement if that activity focused on civic activities. And this all makes sense to us, but I think when you look at the literature, in a lot of studies, they test whether any type of outcome or any type of program is related to a whole range of outcomes. And without really thinking about this correspondence between what are they doing in the activity, what are they trying to change, what are their goals, what are their experiences they're providing, and then what should they be expecting in terms of changes in youth development. And then although we did see some positive things, in terms of academics, we did see that being in programs was related to higher graduation rates, higher engagement in school, higher motivation, all that's great. Some outcomes like test scores and grades, it was harder to move the needle on. I'm going to talk about in a few minutes the methods and potential method implications. But some outcomes like test scores and grades may be hard to move because they're so heavily influenced by school. Right. So I think understanding that, but I know these two outcomes are really critical because, um, it's often a requirement for funding and, a focus of policy and funding streams. Okay. So some of those specific outcomes, just to give you a sense of some of the range of things we looked at, like we looked at persistence, sense of responsibility, work habits, self-control, emotion regulation, prosocial behavior. We included a range of studies. We looked at qualitative. So in some areas, like developing a sense of responsibility, the literature is largely qualitative. Other ones, it may be more likely correlational. And work habits has actually persistence. Some of these have qualitative, but like largely work habits is more correlational. There are a few places where they've done more experimental studies, and that's where we typically saw more mixed evidence. So I'm going to go forward one slide, and this is where I want to highlight this for academic success. So the committee decided to highlight certain studies if they had more rigorous designs like experimental or longitudinal. Because grades and test scores have been studied so much, there's more likely to be experimental evidence there than almost any of the other outcomes. And so it's unclear to me at this point if the more mixed findings in terms of grades and test scores are because they're harder to change, which I do believe they are, and or it's because of the method. And again, whether they found that mix, because in a lot of programs, I mean, there's tons of issues with experiments and out of school activities, like understanding the heterogeneity within your participants, heterogeneity among your non-participants, and understand that your non-participants may be going to an activity that's equally helpful, right? So there's lots of issues here, which we tried to grapple with as a committee, but it's also balancing that and the types of designs that certain groups see as strong evidence. So two of the takeaways from all this work on outcomes is that two things are important. One, making sure we have that connection between what is happening in the activity, what is the activity providing, what is the youth engaging in, because they may not be engaging in all that's provided in the activity. And then how does that relate to which outcomes? So really having that logic model laid out about what are youth being exposed to, and then what's the outcome that you're actually studying. And then second, really thinking about quality of the activity. And we've known for a long time that quality matters. Unfortunately, it's not often discussed in the studies. And I know this from this report and from other work that I'm doing, that even if it is a high quality program, it would be great for people to discuss the evidence of how they know it's a high quality program or in what ways it's a high quality program. And right now, a lot of the studies don't mention the quality of the activity, unfortunately. And then the other thing is, and I've sort of alluded to this, that in a lot of studies, they test whether a particular activity or a range of activities is related to a range of outcomes, right? And that we need to move, and that the average effects are going to characterize everybody. And it could be that if Mara and I attend the same program, Mara may experience bigger benefits than I do because perhaps she has a stronger identification with the activity, or it means more to her, or she goes more often, or she's more engaged. So it's really, and that's what it's talking about down here in the second bullet, is moving forward. In addition to testing these averages, really looking at like which programs are more helpful, what experiences or what aspects of quality are important to promote which outcomes, which youth may be experiencing bigger aspects of growth, and or are there certain areas of development that an activity has a stronger influence on than others. And then there are a lot of recommendations. They're put into 6 categories. I do have supplementary slides on all of the recommendations, but just to go over the 6, they talk about there's a group of recommendations on funding for after-school programs, making sure it's more stable. There's a set of recommendations looking at those intermediary organizations to help strengthen after school. There's a set of recommendations looking at program quality and making sure the activities that are out there are high quality activities. A 4th set of recommendations focus on more on workforce aspects. And so, for example, just to highlight the university community link, there's a recommendation under number 4 about the university's role in promoting a strong workforce. In number 5, we talk about the importance of understanding the programs that are out there, the participation rate, the quality efforts, understanding OST as a larger system. And then recommendation number 6 is focused on understanding the outcomes associated with participation and sort of a research agenda moving forward. And then I'll skip that. And then, yeah, there's a link to the report, which I think you guys have.
Mhm.
So that's kind of the main part of the presentation. And then, like I said, I do have all the recommendations on supplementary slides if you want to see them.